I just came into the Honor 20 Pro recently, and there's something with this phone that I've been wanting to do for quite a while now. I finally have the chance to do it, so let's jump right in. This is Pocketnow, and I'm Joshua Vergara. What's going on, everybody? Let's take a closer look at the Honor 20 Pro once again, mainly that camera package. There are a couple of things that I want to talk about when it comes to the general phone experience. This is a very easy to handle device. We have so many different flagships coming out right now with such big screens that handling might be a little bit tough on them. But since the Honor 20 Pro has a screen that is just shy of 6.3 inches, the rounded body also allows for this to be a really easy to use phone in one hand. The phone might be a tiny bit thick, and when you look at that camera package, it does stick out quite a bit, but there's a lot going on underneath the surface there. One really nice touch, quite literally, is the fact that the Fingerprint Reader is integrated into the power button over on the side. I don't even have to press the power button, you just have to sort of tap that thumb there, and it just unlocks real quick. Going back to that screen for a second, Honor was one of the first companies to put that punch hole display there, and their punch hole is over on the top left corner of the phone on this IPS display. The punch hole is actually really small, that's one of the selling points of it, and since it's over on the side, it doesn't cut into any of the notification icons here or even the different elements on the other side like the time. But even if there does seem to be some, let's say, safe choices when it comes to the design of this phone, there are still some trends that do make it onto the 20 Pro, including the lack of a headphone jack and also the lack of a micro SD card slot because the specs underneath all of this body happen to be fairly high. You still get 256GB of onboard storage, 8GB of RAM, for the most part very standard for a top-of-the-line flagship phone. And as far as performance is concerned, you have the HiSilicon Kirin 980. And I've been able to use this for a number of games mainly because lately I've been obsessed with a few very particular games including Tactical and the newly released Pokemon Masters. Honor also doesn't leave gamers in the dust, as with this processor they do also have something called GPU Turbo. Now the two games that I just mentioned that I've been playing a lot recently unfortunately don't use GPU Turbo for those enhancements. But that said, there's no problem when it comes to performance whatsoever. I've been really enjoying just playing these games on the regular, so the Honor 20 Pro falls in line with all of the other top-of-the-line flagship phones that we're seeing these days. It has good performance, it actually has good handling, which is a pretty nice thing to see on a big phone like this. And on top of all of that, it just has a nice experience on the daily despite being on Magic UI. Magic UI may not be everyone's cup of tea. Just by default, you don't even get an app drawer, though that can be changed obviously, and a lot of people out there might end up changing this launcher to something else anyway. It does show though that Honor is not afraid to use certain conventions in their phones, despite their affiliations with some other companies. And it's those affiliations that make it a bit of a shame that a phone like this is not available in the US, because of reasons. And the reason why it's a bit of a bummer is because Honor did some experimentation with their latest flagship phone. With the Honor 20 Pro when it was being announced, I remember scratching my head a little bit but then feeling like it would be kind of fun to test out its newest camera package. There's a lot to like here. There's a quad camera setup on the back, but let's focus on the three main lenses first. You get a 48 megapixel sensor that is the Sony IMX sensor that we know and love from a lot of different phones so far. There is a 8 megapixel telephoto lens, and then a 16 megapixel ultra wide lens, which you know I'm going to be a big fan of already. It is a crazy hot day. Well, it's not crazy hot, but it's a pretty hot day out here at Universal Citywalk, where you're going to be seeing some samples, footage and photo from the Honor 20 Pro. So let's run around Universal Citywalk for a bit, get a few bites to eat, and let's talk about this camera. I took the camera with me over to Universal Citywalk just for the hell of it, and also Universal Citywalk, if you haven't been there in a long time, you don't need to go back, first of all. But it was a good place to get some really vivid colors from all of the different signage, and even though we weren't going to Universal Studios itself, it did feel like a bit of a Hollywood experience. So one thing that strikes me about the different lenses on this phone is that they're all quite effective at what they do. You're able to get the ultra wide to fit in just a little bit more into your frame. It may not be a super wide lens compared to some we've seen in other phones, but it's still a nice wide perspective. And then you have the 48 megapixel sensor, which is great especially for video content because the stabilization is quite good. And then that zoom lens, even when you're trying to zoom in closely to a subject, it still has good detail and is not one of those cameras that has a minimum focusing distance where you have to get really far back to get effective photos. But that whole part about zooming into a subject, that is the rub here, because the fourth camera on here is a 2 megapixel macro lens. Do you all know what a macro lens is for in general photography? That means you're taking this camera and getting it as close as you possibly can to a subject. and still having good detail. Literally though, this camera, the 2 megapixel dedicated macro lens, is supposed to be able to get photos from around 4 centimeters away from a subject. So that means that you can get as close as Jesus Christ. And that's what I find so funny about this camera, is that the other lenses already do a good job of getting really close to a subject, because you can do a 5x hybrid zoom, which is actually pretty good, especially for portraits, because you can compress the background and get some really nice photos of, let's say, other people or other objects. But then when you get really close up on a subject, that's also something you can do physically, because you take the camera itself and get really all up on it. I don't know, I just find that really funny, and even Honor themselves were saying that they were experimenting with a macro lens on here because maybe not everybody just wants to have macro photos all the time, and it's not like you can use the macro camera for video anyway, so even in that scenario, why would you want to get that close to something in a video format? You know why I like it though? It's because it's different and it's fun. And it's something that I actually had some fun trying to use while out and about in Universal Citywalk and throughout parts of LA that day. Take a picture of a flower, then zoom right in on it, and then get really close to it and try to compare the detail between the two. That was actually a fun part of the day because macro lenses are not something that we typically use all the time, but when it appears on a phone like this, it makes you think about trying to use it. So perhaps you might learn something new about photography in general. But honestly, when it comes to the camera package in general, I really had no complaints on here. Even with that 32 megapixel front-facing camera, I was able to get some really effective selfies, do some front-facing camera video, and also the focal length of the front-facing camera wasn't too narrow, so maybe a little bit of vlogging might actually be effective here. You might think that adding in a macro lens is just Honor's way of swerving from the fact that the other cameras are, let's just say, decent. But as it turns out, the other cameras are pretty great. Honor's lineage actually shows here. And that extra macro 2 megapixel camera is just extra credit. And because of great photo quality and mostly good video quality, that makes the Honor 20 Pro a bit of a steal because its price is definitely lower than that of other flagship phones. The only thing is you may or may not be able to get this phone in your particular region. Well, because reasons. If you are lucky enough to get your hands on the Honor 20 Pro, maybe you're watching this video on that very handset, let us know about that in the comment sections down below. I also want to know if any of you out there have actually used the macro camera. I thought it was kind of fun to use. It's something different. It made me do things differently as far as a photo and video, like vlog or video is concerned. I just wanted to have some fun with it, and that's exactly what I did in this video. So kudos to the Honor 20 Pro for that. But in any case, I'm going to go ahead and call it on this one. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the Pocketnow channel if you haven't already. Drop some likes on these videos, and like I said, get into the comment sections down below so we can have the discussion about the Honor 20 Pro. But like I said, I'm going to go ahead and call it on this one, and we will see you in our next video.